And we're live on the Entrepreneur's Handbook. Today we have with us Sandhya Hegde, who's a general partner at Unusual Ventures. They invest in early stage companies, particularly in enterprise SaaS. Sandhya's chosen to speak today about the impact of generative AI in enterprise SaaS. So, Sandy, can you tell us why did you pick that topic? Why it's so important?
I picked the topic because I have literally been living, breathing, and thinking about nothing else for a very long time now, probably a couple of years almost. And funny enough, while AI is kind of almost feels like peak hype cycle, like everybody's talking about some of the big companies in the space like OpenAI and ChatGPT. It's still really early in the enterprise software world, right? So while we have all kind of played around with maybe ChatGPT and Midjourney, in terms of how it has impacted the enterprise software industry, we're still kind of in the super early days. And I wanted to really talk about kind of why, what do we need to see, and what is it that founders who are thinking about applying the opportunity that some of these foundation models have created for enterprise tooling, what do you want to think about? Because we also see so many startups right now that are just kind of entering into this without enough thought about the difference between what consumers want from AI, how consumers use AI versus how companies and enterprises will use it. So that's why this is such an important topic and really big opportunity for us.
I think it's interesting, like you said, because so many people focus on the consumer aspects of AI, but in any business, right, the enterprise is often where the biggest opportunity is, because let's say you have a company that has 100,000 employees. If you win that one contract with an AI software, that's huge for your company, right? And you've mentioned as well how things have changed quite a lot over the last 10 years or so. So what insight can you give there about how things have changed?
No, it's a great question. I think, I've been either working in building, selling, or investing in enterprise software for a very long time now. And if I think about kind of, what did we look for, right? I think one of the early waves, for example, was just unbundling, where we went from, everyone uses a few big software tools that kind of do everything for the function, like use Salesforce and that does everything you need in sales, and then use Workday and that does everything. So we went from that to a very unbundled world where for every specific thing there was a best in breed solution. And soon, your sales stack was not just Salesforce, it was maybe 30 different products. If you are a significantly big company, and all of those products do one thing extremely, extremely well, and also maybe integrate with Salesforce, right? So that was kind of a big wave of innovation that we all invested in. And it made solving kind of specific problems, making the software usable a lot easier. So enterprise customers were happy and started buying them. And I think that has kind of played out so much that, in fact, a lot of people are now starting SaaS companies focused on a rebundling vision. I think Rippling is a great example, where they were like, there is no reason why this should be 4 different solutions for you small companies. We will do a all-in-one solution, and that's it. That's our primary differentiator, is it's all in one and it works, right? So that had kind of played out. And obviously, everybody was talking about collaboration and helping people work together on the browser. That was another tailwind. Figma's probably the biggest standout success around that theme, but everywhere, there was definitely a shift towards doing kind of in-browser collaborative work, especially when it's creative, etc. And that, I think, is still an active tailwind. The third one was data, right? And most of the investments I've made in the past decade are all companies that are using data really creatively. That might be, with some machine learning, some predictions, some, just metadata and surfacing that. And that in itself was a big tailwind, but it was all about structured time series data, right? It was mostly numbers. So I think the big shift that has happened is really the fact that these foundation models can both use and generate unstructured data. That's such a big shift, because for a long time, that was kind of how we differentiated between what humans can do well and what the machine can do well. The machine was all about structure and numbers, and the humans were all about the kind of unstructured and creative and fuzzy lines, right? That was our strong suit. So I think what is now possible is that you can probably do like a couple orders of magnitude more of automation, even where there is unstructured data, images, etc. involved. And the which represents like this massive potential change in what our entire like workflow, both on the consumer and enterprise side, can look like in 10 years. Right. And I think that is the big difference, as we have gone, this like big data tailwind we were all investing in has gone from just being about structured data to now being about literally everything. And instead of it being about usability, it's about just automation, which is, exciting and terrifying, and will be pretty, dramatic as everyone figures out how to make these tools reliable.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there as well, because before you'd be hiring people, you'd have lots of people to try and do some of the unstructured work. And it's how do you create systems out of that was always the problem, right? Because if something is very structured, you get automated away. With unstructured, sometimes it's just a pain to do some of this grunt work, which maybe isn't even very creative, but it just has to be done. And now, like you said, that AI can take over some of those roles. And in terms of like AI companies now, right, they can focus on like two different areas, which you mentioned. We talked about like a lot of it's focused on consumer at the moment, and a lot of it's focused on enterprise. Like, why do you think that more people should maybe focus on the enterprise side as opposed to the consumer side of it?
Yeah, I think there's just a ton of market opportunity in enterprise, right? So I think it's equally, if not more, compelling, because the amount of grunt work that can be automated is huge. Like, most people, don't like 80% of their job because it's the less creative part of their work, but someone has to do it. So I think that it's just like massive, massive market opportunity. But it requires a pretty different approach. It requires the technology to be in a pretty different place. And I'll share kind of a couple of examples, right? When it comes to consumer use cases, I think often like the easiest thing to do is the 0 to 1, right? Which is, Midjourney is a great example. Like, I'm a word person, not an art person. I can now use my words to make some art. I have very, very little control over that art, but it's so much better than doing nothing. I am delighted, happy. I'm giving them, whatever, the $5-10 a month, even if I'm using it twice, because like, what was the alternative, right? So as long as the quality is high, I don't need control, because I'm a consumer of it. I'm not a professional artist. However, if you're a professional artist, right, I'll share the example of one of the companies I'm now on the board of, called Viscom. And Viscom is a generative AI tool specifically for 3D product designers. So if you work at Nike, you work at Ford, you work at Marks and Spencer, you draw and design for a living, and like 3D objects. And eventually you don't just like have a sketch, you have a 3D model, someone actually manufactures this thing. So there's a ton of work. And a lot of the work, you can kind of divide it up between what we would call creative thinking and actual kind of production execution, which is, okay, I want this to look a certain way. I've started the work, but it's going to take me a couple more hours of like specifically, trying a few different shades and textures to get it right. And that's what Viscom automates, right? So it's a sketching native tool that you have complete control over. It starts with like the drawing you have made of the exact new shoe you want, and then helps you kind of just produce the work much, much faster. Literally, like things that would take 60 hours, you could do in, less than 1 hour, right? So that kind of time saving is enormous. But you can't just do that with a text to image like prompt, because you need control. You need an entirely different workflow. And because you're doing it for a company, right? The company needs to know that the model was fine tuned, trained on their proprietary data because they care about copyrights immensely, right? They have something to lose. They do not want to get sued. Whereas consumers like care a lot less. No one is, suing individual consumers. They're not even really like oftentimes monetizing the output of these tools. So they don't have to worry about like, I need my own custom model trained on things I have previously created and have copyright for before I can use this. So I think the considerations that these companies need to make in enterprise are, fairly different. It's less about like how easy is it to use, like, oh, I can just like go into Discord and say 5 words and have something, versus, okay, how can I use this reliably, and without having to worry about security and copyright, and I can collaborate with all my other team members and have this platform that like fits into my workflow as a professional creative. So I think the end product just looks dramatically different for the consumer and enterprise markets. And the mistake we often see a lot of founders making is not appreciate that nuance, and everything just kind of like has a chat interface, and now you're like, oh, this is generative AI because you're using chat instead of something else. And like, did the customer want that? Right? Who are you building for, right? So I think that's kind of what we are seeing right now. And the realization is definitely setting in, and people are starting to kind of go back to the drawing board when it comes to designing their product.
I think it's interesting there what you said about chat as well, because chatbots have been around for a while and nobody really liked using them. And now all of a sudden, everyone's using a chat interface for everything. And like I said, there's so many other different ways that people can explore to get the like AI tools out there. And it doesn't have to be a chat.
Yeah. I think there's before Unusual, I was at this company called Amplitude, and one of the founders described this really well, because they have to think about like, how do you use this in analytics, right? And I meet a lot of founders who are like, great, analytics is going to be so simple now. Business users can just like ask a question and get an answer. Great, right? The reality is a lot more complicated, which is, if you know specifically exactly what you want, the kind of point and click interface that we had developed to date is actually faster than trying to describe it. And then there are some things that are just hard to describe well if you're not sure what language is being expected. But, like, do I call this like the squiggly chart? I don't know what, I'm supposed to call it, but I've always seen it's the squiggly. I want the squiggly chart. So I think there's some use cases where the existing interfaces we had is good. And then there are other use cases where, people didn't know what they wanted, didn't know where to start. And really what they wanted was a co-pilot or an advisor who could tell them, hey, you're new to the company, you're new to this tool, you're new to this platform. Let me help you get started. If you have a vague question, I can help you orient and, take you in a specific direction. So it's almost like they wanted another user to help them. They wanted an expert. So I think as founders and product managers, our advice is very much think about that, right? Think about who your user is and what they are looking for before you default to like the same interface for all of them. Deploying a chat interface has become so much easier that everyone kind of starts there. The reality is it's not the right interaction for every problem you want to solve. And then there's, the issue of just reliability, right? These models are not deterministic. They won't create the same output every time you give them the same input. They'll create different outputs. Now, that might be okay if I'm just, I have like a non-playing character in a game, right? That's a feature, not a bug. If it's kind of storytelling or casual interaction or like a personal AI friend, like not deterministic is a feature for all those use cases. For enterprise use cases where you don't want to like have to worry about the output being different each time you're asking it the same thing, it's a bug, not a feature. So now you're taking something that's not very good at this particular problem, right? An LLM, and kind of twisting it into a solution that needs determinism, needs reliability, needs to say exactly the same answer when you ask the same question. So I think even that means, like, you have to be very thoughtful from as a CTO and kind of technical co-founder on how you're going to implement this for enterprise versus just saying what works for consumers will work for us.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you want to find some of the best lessons from season 1 of this podcast, then you can download our free ebook using the link in the show notes. You'll also get updates multiple times a week from our editors here at Entrepreneur's Handbook, all aimed at helping you become a better entrepreneur and helping you to grow and scale your business. Let's get back to the show. And another big part of that, as you said, is like the governance side, right? Because if these companies, like, you've seen that there's different mistakes now where some people, employees, have been using ChatGPT for their work, and they're putting in this proprietary information or embargoed information into ChatGPT, and that's coming out in other people's answers now, right? And I think there's still an education piece, but maybe a lot of people don't quite understand that yet, that anything you put into ChatGPT is now part of ChatGPT's learning, right? And it could potentially spit it out somewhere else. And it's something to be careful of, right? And then, like, in terms of the adoption as well, right? Because there's one thing about, like, companies trying to get their employees to use like AI tools, right? But what were the other side about when it's driving from the bottom up to the top?
Yeah, I think what we are seeing right now is kind of less companies asking their employees to use it. I think that has actually not quite happened yet. It's more, people who are, the product-led growth motion is the only way AI companies are really growing right now, at like 99% of them. So it's all kind of people finding something and trying to bring it into the company because some kind of influencer they follow on, LinkedIn or Twitter, or should I say X now, really.
Oh, yeah.
Don't make me start. I love Twitter. It's painful. So I think it's more that they see somebody that they admire, like, really being able to take advantage of this, not just to save time. I think that's actually the least exciting reason. It's to be able to do things you just couldn't do before, right? So they see somebody like that and say, okay, I want to use this in my work. It's exciting, and bring it in. But then if it's a bigger company, the company has concerns. They're like, well, we don't have a policy yet. We don't know what the risks are. For example, OpenAI says, oh, if you choose to not have your data go into our training data, just change this setting, all is well. But they're like, well, we're not sure. Like, we haven't vetted that. Like, they're saying that, but I'm not sure yet exactly what the boundaries here are, right? So we have met multiple companies that have, said, okay, at work, no tools that use GPT-4 at all. Forget just like ChatGPT, but all the other startups that are using it. And it's an abundance of caution as they figure out, what's our policy, what are the risks. We also see a ton of interest amongst companies, and it's top down. It's mostly companies with strong engineering teams, technical leadership, that for whom this is again like a big new shiny toy, and it's has the potential to be more than a toy. So they have will usually some of the most kind of well-resourced engineering teams that we see, they usually have almost like 3 different AI squads figuring out, okay, how can we take advantage of this, right? So the squad 1 will focus on where in our product can we add AI features. Squad 2 will focus on, okay, how can we make our entire company more productive by building internally using the APIs instead of like buying another SaaS tool. We will build something internally. And I think the top 2 use cases, like every time I talk to a company, these are the 2 use cases that come up for internal uses. One is, can we like search our own docs, right? Across like Google Drive and Slack and Dropbox, like can we like have search across enterprise documents so that I can easily understand what already exists, whether it's for some sales enablement or some product documentation. Like I can find things without having to click into documents. I'll just say what I'm looking for, and this thing will find it, summarize it for me which is actually something LLMs are really, really good at doing, right? Summarization, classification, they're great. And then there's the third one, which is, all the infrastructure, like governance, and how do we like deploy the model? How do we do we need GPUs? We haven't done that before. Where do we get the GPUs from? Where is it cheap? Where is it expensive? And so there's a ton of like infrastructure, which both of these teams need, right? The ones that are shipping customer facing features, the one shipping internal employee facing features. The second use case, by the way, is customer support. Nobody wants to support customers, Amardeep. This is my takeaway. When I talk to these companies, all of them are like, can we just automate
Yeah.
customer support? And every time there's a question, there'll be a bot and an agent that will answer the question after reading all of our documentation, and will add voice, and it will even talk to them. Can we please just like not have to support customers anymore? I'm only partially kidding. People really want that.
It's like with Meta, right? If anything goes wrong with your Meta account, Instagram, anything like that, it's almost impossible to get a hold of a person to help you. They just have all these different layers of trying to get things sorted out. So it's one of the difficult things. Sometimes it's sometimes just reassuring to talk to a person about it, but you can see why it's a pain for companies to try to train up people, and there's obviously high churn in those kind of areas as well. And like one interesting thing that's happened recently too is with ChatGPT that the users has decreased recently, right? But it's only by a small amount, but some people are saying, oh, this is the end of AI, which obviously is not quite true, right? It's just month on month, there's a bit of a decrease there. But what do you think it is maybe caused behind that at the moment, of where some of the retention has slipped a little bit with some of the AI-based tools that could potentially be improved, or what's behind?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with the hype cycle, right? So what happens when you are at the peak of a hype cycle is it's really easy to like get signups and registrations, right? The entire world is paying attention to what you're doing, which honestly is the hardest thing to do for a new product. Usually, like you have a new product and you're like desperately trying to get people to care about the problem you solve, right? And like maybe there's a small pool of people who do and no one else does. With generative AI, the whole world is paying attention. Everyone is curious. So, like the amount of signups you can get for something that is literally just a landing page is through the roof. So, usually when I look at seed stage companies, we invest, pre-revenue. Usually that's like a prototype, maybe a private beta for the product. And I have like an order of magnitude discount for AI. So usually if I thought having 1,000 signups for like a waiting list is good, if you're in AI, you better have 10,000, or like you're really missing them up, because there's just so much interest in the ecosystem, and that just organically means low retention, because these are not all people who specifically were trying to do something new or solve a problem. They were curious. So in like the professional sales language, you would say they are not qualified leads, they are looky-loos, right? So I think that organically creates a bunch of like retention issues. For example, I'm pretty sure that if you like compare ChatGPT versus GitHub Copilot, which at some level has the same underlying, technology, running kind of all of it. I'm sure GitHub Copilot has a better, retention rate on a cohorted basis, because people who sign up for it are like, focused on a specific problem that they are looking to solve. So even the ones who are curious have like an immediate use case, which is the only thing GitHub Copilot does. Whereas if you go on, if you're curious about ChatGPT, where do you even start, right? There's a learning curve of like, what is this good at? It's clearly not going to replace Google search. Thankfully, we have all stopped talking about that. But so what is it good for? Like, what am I currently doing that I should start doing here? What can I do that I have never done before? That's a pretty steep learning curve. And I think most people just fall off there. So because of that hype cycle, I think we are going to see poor retention rates. And the other issue, as this is more relevant to enterprise than consumer, is the black box issue, which is that you try it a few times, but you're not still able to make it do exactly what you want it to do, and you don't know why, right? Like it's not a software, it's a model. So you don't really have like the levers to pull outside of this like very limited prompting interface, which is why we have all of these kind of content players that have spun up who just literally do prompt best practices, and then you change the model version. By the way, old prompts don't work the same way anymore, right? And nobody knows why. Like we were having a whole conversation about, has GPT-4 gotten worse? Maybe, maybe not. No one can tell. So I think that black box issue is definitely a big question in the enterprise, where people are still trying to figure out like what is it I can reliably use it for. So again, you will see retention issues there. And I think all of this for me is just the signs of an early but excited market, and it's the investor's responsibility to like take that into account, and not run away with our own excitement and say, oh, everyone is a unicorn because you have a lot of signups. So I think that's the role we play, is kind of think a little further ahead and say, what, even if there's excitement, let's wait till we have retention to say, yes, we have product market fit, we have a strategy. Now we are going to go scale this particular idea, as opposed to, we've made it all as well.
One of the things I've been thinking as well recently is because I haven't kept up with like AI prompting very well myself. And what I've decided is I'm going to be a second player here, of just let everybody work it out. Once they've got all the guides, once it's all figured out, then I'll come in and I can just follow those guides. And it's an interesting position to be in, right? Is that I think a lot of people are trying to get in straight away. Whereas actually, like, for example, with enterprise, if somebody creates an enterprise software that's perfect or like has been through these issues, then you can go and buy their enterprise software rather than you in your own company trying to change ChatGPT to work for you. And then like you're outsourcing in a way, right? Because it's going to be really difficult. And I think obviously people underestimate that sometimes of how hard it is to build, especially for enterprise, because you've got to have a lot more safety involved, like you said. And it's like, you could try to build that in-house, or you could wait till somebody figures out and then just buy it off them. And I know which one I'd rather do personally.
Yeah. I think the reality is this, there's always going to be people for whom just the novelty is the feature. The novelty is the value prop. And that's why they are in it. Right? They're in it for the novelty, and they want to be the first few people to try it because that's their identity, that's how they live. And right now, all of them have like dipped their fingers in AI, and in fact have even like moved on from just thinking about like LLMs to figuring out, okay, what's an autonomous agent? Can we build one that will like be an autonomous SDR, an autonomous assistant, not autonomous whatever? I think we are in this kind of very unique place where while the technology is still early, people are already thinking up like what is possible in 10 years, while we haven't really quite nailed like how to manage what we already have yet. But there's promise, right? I think some of the things we are looking at is, for example, to kind of take that black box apart, like chain of thought, right? Can you build user interfaces where the AI really acts like a human, in the sense that while it's working, it explains what it's doing, right? To say, okay, here's kind of what I'm doing. And you can even kind of see like how, activations are happening in the latent space of like, oh, this is kind of the pattern matching that it did when I asked it this question, which gives me more confidence that it interpreted my question correctly and it's explaining the steps it's following. And I can see that those steps make sense. And so you have less of a black box interface. And I think all of those will become really important for this, expert co-pilot interface use case. And then there'll be some things where, I just don't want to have any interface. I want it to just magically in the background finish my work, be the incredible autocomplete that it really is, right? Which, definitely the future I want to live in.
So thanks so much for coming on today. It's been really good to chat, and like I've learned quite a lot myself. If people want to find out more about you, they want to find out more about Unusual, where should they go to?
All over social media, but please check out our website, unusual.vc. And if you are a founder working on an AI startup, you're thinking about enterprise problems, I'm Sandhya at unusual.vc, and would love to chat. I would also be remiss to not share my podcast, the Startup Field Guide. We specifically interview kind of unicorn founders and really try to like focus on the first year of their company building and record for history what it is that actually worked, what went wrong, what were all the hypotheses they had that didn't play out the way they would. Because by the time they go public, they're going to rewrite all the narrative, and it's going to be like, yes, we had this vision and everything worked perfectly. So I try to capture kind of the hardship of all the ambiguity when you are early as a founder. And check out our podcast, Startup Field Guide, on all platforms.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I love that as well, because like you said, sometimes you listen to people talk and like, is that really why you made this? Or is it just, I've changed your story, so now that's why you made it? And yeah, it's always interesting to hear those origin stories and how they can sometimes change over time. So
Right.
Thank you so much for coming on again. Like, have you got any final words to the audience?
No, thank you so much for having me, Amardeep. Hopefully I'll be in London soon and we should do a meetup together.